Sacagawea was in horrible pain during Lewis and Clark's expedition, and scholars recently uncovered the horrific reason why. Sacagawea was one tough woman. When she was a teenage mother, this Shoshone explorer tied her baby to her back and fearlessly travelled westward across America as part of Lewis and Clark's famous expedition. For most people, that's the beginning and end of Sacagawea's story, but from her perilous childhood to her nightmare marriage, there's much more to know about this indigenous icon. In 1788, in the mountainous terrain on the border of Montana and Idaho, Sacagawea was born into the Shoshone tribe. When she was around 12 years old, an enemy tribe, the Hidatsa, viciously attacked her people. During the raid, Sacagawea watched the carnage unfold as several of her tribe were murdered. She was abducted and taken to Hidatsa lands. In some versions of her story, the Hidatsa treated Sacagawea horribly during her captivity. She was little more than a servant for 3 long years. Then, when she turned 16, her captors decided their young hostage was worth more as a teen bride than as an indentured servant. So, they sold her to a man named Toussaint Charbonneau. In other versions of the story, he won Sacagawea while gambling. Whatever the truth, the French-Canadian settler who had a track record of violent assault against women wasn't interested in asking for Sacagawea's permission. According to some sources, he made money by selling women into slavery. Clearly, no one was devoted to being a monster, quite like Charbonneau, so it shouldn't be surprising that Sacagawea wasn't actually his only wife. In fact, he was already married to another woman from the Shoshone Nation. He was also 30 years older than Sacagawea when they married. In November of 1804, shortly after her wedding, Sacagawea met 2 men who would change her life forever. The cartographers and explorers, Captain Meriwether Lewis and Captain William Clark. Lewis and Clark were on a mission to explore America's newly acquired lands and create a map of the territories gained in the Louisiana Purchase. However, their team wasn't quite complete. The men needed indigenous guides and interpreters to help them map the continent. The pair didn't think much of Toussaint Charbonneau, but they did like his wife. Since Sacagawea spoke Shoshone, they wanted to take her on their journey. Charbonneau was something of a fourth wheel. Mere months before the journey began, Sacagawea gave birth to her first child, a baby boy named Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. Supposedly, she ate crushed rattlesnakes during her labour to help speed up her birth, further proof that Sacagawea was fierce from the start. While most new mothers would take it easy, Sacagawea was the exception. Just weeks after giving birth, she set out with Lewis and Clark. The perilous trek began in April 1805, and while everyone knew it would be hard, Sacagawea had it especially rough. As a new mother, she had to carry her newborn baby on her back the entire time. Sacagawea was incredibly important to the journey, but so was her baby Jean-Baptiste. Clark immediately developed a soft spot for the boy, nicknaming him Little Pomp or Pompey. And Jean-Baptiste wasn't just cute, he was helpful too. His presence immediately put other tribes at ease and assured them that the expedition was just there to map and travel, not to harm. Sacagawea interpreted between the explorers and other indigenous tribes. She also cooked, foraged, cleaned, made herbal medicines, and basically kept everything running smoothly. She made everything look easy, but soon she'd encounter something chilling that would shake even her steadfast composure. As the group approached new terrain, Sacagawea realised that she recognised this place. It was the land where the Hidatsa kidnapped her all those years ago. She was close to her childhood home. As a sign of how tough she'd become throughout her life, she didn't even cry when she recognised such a monumentally important place. On May 14th, 1805, the expedition hit a snag. Sacagawea's husband was steering one of the boats when a gust of wind suddenly made him lose control. Charbonneau became so scared that, in a panic, he nearly overturned the entire boat. Thankfully, Sacagawea sprang into action and saved the day. Valuable papers and much-needed equipment tumbled overboard, and as Charbonneau sat paralysed by fear, Sacagawea bravely dove into the water and rescued the documents and tools. After this, William Lewis wrote that Charbonneau was a man of no peculiar merit and the most timid waterman in the world. But as comically inept as he was, Charbonneau was no joke. He made Sacagawea's life miserable, as we know from a chilling passage in the explorer's journals. A month after she saved the expedition, Sacagawea fell dangerously ill and went out of her senses. Historians now believe that she had gonorrhea, contracted from her no-good husband. Clark was so unimpressed by Charbonneau's behaviour during his wife's frequent illnesses that he wrote, "If she dies, it will be the fault of her husband, as I am now convinced." Sacagawea managed to recover enough to continue the journey, but shortly after, Lewis and Clark's crew reached the lands of the Shoshone people, the place where Sacagawea had lived as a child. The last time she recognised a place from her past, she kept her emotions to herself, but this time they came rushing out, and her stony reserve finally broke. She sang and danced in joy, startling the other travellers. What's more, the land wasn't the only thing Sacagawea recognised. While there, she also met people from her past. She met a girl who'd also been abducted by a rival tribe, but unlike Sacagawea, she'd managed to escape and return home to the Shoshone. Sacagawea must have experienced incredibly mixed emotions as she heard about the life she could have had. When she met the tribe's chief, she encountered another familiar face. Chief Kameawait was her own brother. When she saw him, Clark says that Sacagawea danced for the joyful sight, and Lewis notes that all those who were present were moved by the family reunion. Another diary entry says that when Sacagawea realised that the chief was her sibling, she immediately threw her blanket over him as a sign of affection and began to cry. The siblings talked privately, and for the rest of the night, Sacagawea couldn't help but burst into tears. In some versions of this story, Sacagawea also met the man that she should have married. When she was very young, her family promised her to a fellow tribesman. One of Clark's diary entries in November 1804 mentions that Charbonneau beat Sacagawea so brutally that in at least one instance the explorers had to intervene. The wife of Charbonneau was badly treated by him for speaking to another Indian woman, and we reproved him severely for his brutality. In the autumn of 1805, the journey across America was looking decidedly grim. Lewis and Clark's surroundings were so bare that even Sacagawea, who could normally find food in any environment, came back empty-handed. In the end, the travellers were so hungry that they ate bear fat in an attempt to survive. Despite the perilousness of the journey, Lewis and Clark consistently described Sacagawea in glowing terms. She was, according to the two settlers, plucky and determined, as well as intelligent, cheerful, resourceful, tireless, faithful. Clark summed it up best when he declared that Sacagawea inspired us. After a long and treacherous journey, the travellers finally reached the west coast. Sacagawea didn't make many demands during the expedition, but when she heard that a beached whale had washed up on shore, she insisted on going and seeing it for herself. She marvelled at the monstrous animal and the beautiful Pacific Ocean. Looking back, this was one of her last happy moments. Soon after Sacagawea breathed in the ocean air, she and the rest of Lewis and Clark's expedition turned around. Unfortunately, their return journey didn't go entirely smoothly. For weeks, Sacagawea's son became dangerously ill. The entire expedition banded together to help the baby recover, and thankfully he pulled through. Other than little Pompey's illness, the rest of the trip back was mercifully uneventful. By late 1806, more than a year after Sacagawea had first joined the explorers, it was finally time to go back home to the Hidatsa tribe. While we don't know how she felt about the journey ending, we do know that parting with Lewis and Clark was emotional. Clark had grown to love Sacagawea's son so much that he even wanted to adopt him. Sacagawea and her husband lived with the Hidatsa for 3 years before packing up and accepting Clark's invitation to meet him in St. Louis, Missouri. The family settled in the city and tried to make it work, but at heart it seems like both Sacagawea and Charbonneau preferred the wilderness. They prepared to leave St. Louis, but before they did, Sacagawea made a devastating choice. She realised that with his wealth, social standing and clear love for her son, William Clark could give her baby a better life than she could. In 1809, Sacagawea and her husband decided to leave Pompey with Clark in St. Louis, where he attended school and eventually grew up to become an explorer, just like his mother. At this time, Sacagawea was carrying her second child, and unfortunately her pregnancy couldn't have been harder. She was extremely ill and weak, but in true Sacagawea fashion, she still managed to give birth to a girl named Lizette in 1812. Sadly, she wouldn't get to know her daughter very well. In December of 1812, Sacagawea became gravely ill, with historians blaming a putrid fever or perhaps typhus. Either way, the results were fatal. Despite toughing it out so many times in the past, this time Sacagawea couldn't make it through. She died on December 20th, 1812, at just 24 years old. Yet, according to some historians, this isn't the real ending of Sacagawea's story. In the early 1900s, a scholar claimed that Sacagawea had lived until 1884 and died in Wyoming. Over a century later, and after a lot of investigating, most historians don't believe these claims. For the most part, people think that this was a different woman, now called the Wind River Sacagawea. After losing his wife to illness and his son to William Clark, Sacagawea's widower decided to start over with a new family. He accepted Clark's offer to formally adopt his other child, Lizette, while he returned to his old fur-trading ways. While Pompey grew up and inherited his mother's adventurous gene, little Lizette wasn't so lucky. All we know is that she probably died sometime during her childhood. Toussaint Charbonneau continued to be a scumbag and eventually married at least 5 different wives. His last marriage occurred when he was 70. His bride was 14. Even death couldn't stop Sacagawea's story. Afterwards, she became an American and Shoshone icon. As a tribute to her role in mapping the nation, her face appeared on US currency, and the river where she bravely saved important documents from the expedition is now Sacagawea River. One of the most famous aspects of her story is a supposed love affair with William Clark. The pair clearly got along very well, with Clark nicknaming her Janie, saving her from her cruel husband, and adoring her baby son. But despite depictions in books and movies to the contrary, most historians don't believe that Clark and Sacagawea were secretly in love. They cared for each other very much, but when it came to longing glances and moonlit walks, probably not. Sacagawea's story is difficult to get a truly clear picture of, because everything we know about her was written in journals by other people. We have no documents written by her. Because of this, it's hard to get real insight into who she was and what she thought. But what we do know is that she was born to be an adventurer. Depending on the translation, her name appropriately means boat launcher or bird woman. In both cases, seeing the world was part of Sacagawea's destiny. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and